Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Nia Malika Henderson. John King is off. The president today spent 33 minutes talking to reporters this morning. Most of that was dedicated to his response to mass shootings in America. He said his influence over gun policy is stronger now than in past years. And he once again blamed mental health, not guns, for the horrific shootings that killed dozens of people just this past week.
The gun doesn't pull the trigger. A sick mind pulls the trigger. We want to take the guns out of the hands of crazy, demented, sick people. I don't want to have crazy people having guns.
We begin the hour right there with a big and risky promise. The president says he can bend the big gun lobby to his will.
I have a great relationship with the NRA. They supported me very early, and that's been a great decision they made. We'll see where the NRA will be, but we have to have meaningful background checks. The NRA, I've spoken to them numerous times. They're really good people. They're great patriots. They love our country. They love our country so much, and frankly, I really think they're going to get there also. I think in the end, Wayne and the NRA will either be there or maybe we'll be a little bit more neutral, and that would be okay too. But look, the NRA has over the years taken a very, very tough stance on everything, and I understand it. You know, it's a slippery slope. They think you approve one thing and that leads to a lot of bad things. I don't agree with that.
President Trump this morning on the White House lawn says tighter background checks now have tremendous support after two massacres put the country's gun problem back on front pages. This moment, the president insists, is different than all the others. After Parkland, after Las Vegas, after Sandy Hook, after every other mass shooting that sparked the very same national conversation about guns. But what exactly the president wants remains quite murky. He didn't define what meaningful background checks actually look like, but his bet is clear that the NRA and his base will follow him wherever he goes.
We're looking at Toomey Mansion. We actually, if you look, there are many bills that have been put in over a period of 4 or 5 years. Right. They went nowhere. But there's never been a president like President Trump. I think my base relies very much on common sense, and they rely on me in terms of telling them what's happening.
Here with us to share their reporting and their insights, we've got CNN's Manu Raju, Annie Linsky with the Washington Post, John Bresnahan with Politico, and Catherine Lucy with the Wall Street Journal. So here we are again, everyone, a mass shooting, the president reacting to it, Mitch McConnell talking about it, as well as other Republicans. A lot of people are in the president's ear on this issue, Manu. Who ultimately wins out?
Well, it seems a lot like what we heard in the aftermath of the Parkland massacre, when the president made some very similar remarks that they're going to be very strong on background checks, made that those famous comments that he's willing to take on the NRA. He criticized some Republicans for not standing up to the NRA. And what happened ultimately? The president did not move forward the way that he did under pressure from the NRA. So right now, yes, he's talking about doing something on background checks. The word that he's been qualifying what he wants to do. He says sensible background checks. Well, what is sensible and meaningful? And what exactly does that mean? Yeah. There are lots of different versions of background checks bill. The House version is a universal background checks bill. The White House already opposes that. Republicans already oppose that bill. It's not going to pass the Senate. The Manchin-Toomey bill is narrower than the House passed bill because it deals with commercial transactions, not private transactions. That bill failed in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook massacre.
It got 4 Republicans to vote for it. 2 aren't even in the Senate anymore.
And a lot of the Republicans still serve in the Senate, so that still it's very unlikely to pass. So what ultimately gets passed, it seems at the moment, this is talk. We'll see when it actually gets passed.
But President Trump here saying that he's got more influence, greater influence over gun policy than he did in the past.
On background checks, we have tremendous support for really common sense, sensible, important background checks. I think with a lot of success that we have, I think I have a greater influence now over the Senate and over the House.
Can it get done now?
I think we can get something really good done.
And the idea the president said he can move his base on this, but in the past we've obviously seen his base move him.
I mean, this will be a huge test for Trump. And think about where he's changed Republican ideology on trade, on immigration. He's moved the party in a whole new direction. Guns is another issue. I mean, he noted in his remarks today that the NRA supported him early, and they've supported him very actively. They dumped tens of millions of dollars into his election in 2016. Now they don't have the money this time,
right?
So we'll see what happens. And another point, our colleagues in Florida reported today the Trump campaign in Florida is sending volunteers to gun shows to register Republicans. That's the base he's going to go after here. So, I mean, he's it's a tough place for him.
And here was Wayne LaPierre, who, of course, is one of those voices in the president's ear. This is what he had to say. The NRA opposes any legislation that unfairly infringes upon the rights of law-abiding citizens. The inconvenient truth is this: the proposals being discussed by many would not have prevented the horrific tragedies in El Paso and Dayton. Worse, they would make millions of law-abiding Americans less safe and less able to defend themselves and their loved ones. Annie, you want to jump in?
I mean, that's exactly what we've heard from the NRA in the past. It's sort of a, almost cookie cutter statement from them. But what's changed here, and what I think this will be a test for the NRA as well, is this organization is not the NRA it was 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, they have had an enormous amount of internal turmoil. Chris Cox, their longtime top lobbyist, is no longer part of this organization, and we're having, headline after headline over the problems that they're having. So I think it will be interesting to see if they really do have the muscle that they've had in the past, or if they are internally distracted. I mean, you could see it playing either way, where something like this brings the organization back together again. But they saw real losses in 2018 in those midterm elections, and the organization, the suburban districts, absolutely right. And the organization just is not as united as it's been in the past.
What is striking about this, even though the president on the South Lawn said he didn't talk this way after Parkland, we'll pull up this clip of the president after Parkland sounding exactly like he sounds now.
We're going to be very strong on background checks. We're going to be doing very strong background checks. We want to be very powerful, very strong on background checks. We certainly have to strengthen background checks. Everybody agrees with that. We're really, I think, going to have the support of the NRA having to do with background checks, very strong background checks. I think it's time. It's time that a president stepped up. And we haven't had them, and I'm talking Democrat and Republican presidents. They have not stepped up. It's not going to be talk like it has been in the past. It's been going on too long, too many instances, and we're going to get it done.
The similarity is remarkable. In many ways, he sounds stronger back then than he does now, saying, they're going to be strong background checks, for instance.
Well, in that time, as Manu said, he held a meeting with Republican lawmakers at the White House, accused some of them of not being tough enough with the NRA, insisted he would be tougher with the NRA, and then ultimately, after some conversations with the NRA, kind of backed away from some of this. So I think the thing we really have to watch is, as you said, the specificity in what he will actually get behind with legislation, because you have a lot of Republican senators who aren't going to make any moves unless they know they have cover from the president. And we've seen this not just on guns, but on lots of issues where they are really waiting for a signal from the White House that the legislation that's moving along will have White House backing, that they're not going to walk out on something that he's not going to be with them on.
And that's been the test for Trump for so long, because when he moderates on some of these issues, he gets blowback from the right, then he ultimately goes back to what his base ultimately wants. Will he decide to moderate on this issue and risk the wrath from the right? I think that's still very much an open question.
And we heard from Senator McConnell yesterday saying that there will be a debate, they will bring this up, and some saw this as a move for him, just acknowledging that there would actually be
and he said
discussion and conversation on this, and that he cited background checks and red flag laws as two things that will be the center of the conversation, but he wasn't committing at this point to anything specific either, so we really have to see.
We'll see where this goes. Next, all eyes on Mitch McConnell. The president assumes Republicans in Congress will follow his lead on background checks. And today he said Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is already with him.
Frankly, we need intelligent background checks, okay? This isn't a question of NRA, Republican, or Democrat. I will tell you, I spoke to Mitch McConnell yesterday. He's totally on board.
Already, McConnell's office says there is a big disagreement over what totally on board actually means. But both Trump and McConnell are now on record and agree on at least one thing, that the Senate can wait out these next 3 weeks.
By the time you call them back, they're going to be back anyway. I don't think we'll need to call them back. I think we'll have a very good package by the time they come back, and they can start debating and voting on it then. So I really don't think for the extra little time it matters. Leadership is doing a really good job.
And Monica, you've got some of the reporting from Mitch McConnell in his office about where he is on any of this. Obviously, you saw Donald Trump there making the big claim that he is on board.
Yeah, I mean, the president has been trying to suggest that there's some serious movement when there actually is none at the moment. What McConnell is open to is not any specific piece of legislation. Their office made that clear after the president's remarks that he was totally on board, instead saying that he's open to they talked about broad policy ideas, a larger outline of what can be done, and McConnell has dispatched his key chairman to try to figure out what legislative solution can move ahead. What it seems to be happening here, McConnell does not want to bring the Senate back, because if he did, the Republicans would be getting hammered every single day by Democrats who go to the floor, demand they pass the House-passed bill, which does not have the votes to pass, and the Republicans don't have a solution of their own. So can they cobble something together in the next few weeks that could give them cover? Potentially, this red flags legislation to empower localities to try to deny people.
With Graham and Blumenthal.
Yeah, and there's a few other different versions of that.
Money to the different states to encourage them to implement these red flags laws.
Yeah, that's possible. That could pass, but that's going to take some time to play out.
Yeah, and we heard McConnell, he was talking to a local radio station about whether or not the Senate was going to come back.
You're not calling people back in early to address this gun legislation.
Well, if we did that, we just have people scoring points and nothing would happen. There has to be a bipartisan discussion here of what we can agree on. If we do it prematurely, it'll just be another frustrating experience for all of us and for the public, where people are just trying to score political points and not trying to get an outcome.
The delay probably works against anything getting done, I would imagine, because that's what we've seen time and time again.
Yeah, certainly, Democrats, advocates of doing something, would say that time is not their friend here, that the urgency of this moment after these two mass shootings is what's driving the conversation. And we've seen, especially in President Trump's White House, when there is so much news and so many things happening, that things can get pushed out of the headlines. They just can. And so there's a big concern among advocates that 3 weeks, sort of blunts their momentum.
Yeah, and Catherine, you mentioned McConnell's language on Front and Center. I think a lot of people heard that and thought this was a sort of a different place that Mitch McConnell was. Here he is with this quote around being front and center of the background checks.
There's also been some discussion about background checks. That's an issue that's been around for a while.
90% of Americans believe in, according to the most recent, I saw it in Politico, Morning Consult poll. 90% say.
There's a lot of support for that, and there's a bipartisan bill in the Senate. Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Republican, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a Democrat. So those are two items that for sure will be front and center as we see what we can come together on and pass.
President, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, because he's talking about Manchin Toomey. Now, Lindsey Graham is on Air Force One today, and he gave a pool report, and he was speaking to reporters. He said, "We're not for Manchin Toomey." So
they all voted against it.
They've all voted against it. So, and then Tom Brasso was in the Senate today because they were in a pro forma session. He said he's not for background checks.
This
or
is
red
for
flag.
reporting. This is him. As for bipartisan background checks legislation, which he previously voted against and has repeatedly fallen short in the Senate, he said, "I don't expect things have changed much."
Well, there's 2 points I want to make here. Trump will do whatever Trump thinks he needs to do for his reelection, and he won't care what where the party goes. He thinks he'll do what he wants to do. You saw it before the 2018 election. He kept pushing the caravans. And that was a disaster for House Republicans. They, that was not the argument they needed to make it going down down to the election.
Right.
And the second part is look at the Senate races in 2020. You have, Purdue in Georgia. You have John Cornyn in Texas.
Right.
These are not states. These are really strong gun rights states. But then again, you have Colorado and you have Maine.
The suburbs.
Yeah, I mean,
What
McConnell is in a
here?
different, he is a different dynamic.
I do want to say that's a good point, because I think it is true that typically when you have more time, the sort of urgency to get anything done fades. The exception here may be all of these members of Congress are back home, and they may be here. If activists want to start a real momentum, this is when they can start getting into town hall meetings and really pushing these members, and that's when members come back to Washington and say, oh my goodness, I've been hearing from my constituents, and maybe we do have to do something. So I think the ball is very much in the activists' court, and if they are more energized.
And the one challenge, though, is that's why they don't have town halls anymore.
Right. There's no town halls.
And one direction, so one direction it may go is in this red flags direction. You heard the president repeatedly talk about mental health,
and mental
getting
illness.
guns out of the hands of people with mental illness.
It's a sort of small
and so
board
that
issue.
could be a direction where there is some.
And we'll see how Democrats feel about that, because they've already said, these red flag laws without background checks are sort of meaningless. So we'll see. Up next, we go live to Iowa for a key 2020 campaign event. But before we go to break, a sobering reminder today from the Bernie Sanders campaign, releasing this online ad on the 5th anniversary of the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Welcome back. Democrats running for president are being put on the spot this week, pushed to answer a stark question about the president. Is he a white supremacist? About half a dozen candidates say yes, but most of the candidates aren't willing to quite go that far. President Trump was asked this morning if there's any way he and his base can use this to their advantage in 2020.
Democrats calling you and your supporters a white nationalist and a white supremacist help you?
I don't think it helps. First of all, I don't like it when they do it, because I am not any of those things. I think it's a disgrace. And I think it shows how desperate the Democrats are. For them to throw out the race word again, racist, 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 that's all they use to anybody. They call Nancy Pelosi a racist. She's not a racist. They call anybody a racist when they run out of cards.
Nearly every 2020 Democrat getting ready to speak to voters at the Iowa State Fair and attend a key fundraising dinner tonight. And we've got, and Annie, I'm going to go to you on this, because you covered Warren and really all of the candidates. What does this get folks in terms of calling the president a white supremacist? And as we said, a number of them have.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren most recently yesterday in the pages of the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of whether or not the president is a white supremacist has become this litmus test now, yet another litmus test for this giant field of candidates, where some can set themselves apart from others as being the most aggressive toward Trump. And you see candidates like Elizabeth Warren, Jay Inslee also called him a white supremacist. It didn't get as much attention. But when Warren, one of the top tier candidates, says it, she's doing two things there. She's putting a position out there, but she's also speaking to her base, this massive base of support that she's got on the left, and that's who's powering her campaign.
And those are white liberals,
these are white liberals.
Yeah, who are increasingly left on issues of race.
That's right. They're increasingly left on issues of race, and she doesn't take money from big campaign donors. Yeah. So she needs to keep activating these smaller donors to say, like, oh, wow, I really agree with that. I'm going to donate $10 right now.
And the person who isn't willing to go this far is Biden. He, of course, has the most African-American support right now. Here he was expressing some annoyance at this question of whether or not the president is Biden obviously not willing to go as far as Warren on this.
No, and it's interesting. He's trying to make a somewhat nuanced point there, but he also is, there was a good story in the Associated Press today about how he's really centering his campaign more on the contrast with Trump and attacking President Trump than on any specific policy proposal. That he is really framing his argument around what Trump has done for this country, what has happened under his leadership, what kind of leader he is. And so he's going to, and as a result, I think he's going to continue to be pushed on these kinds of questions about just how he's going to label it.
His brand is also very different.
Yeah.
Let's get to his brand. I mean, Joe Biden wants to be the guy who, look, we can all come together as a country. I'm not going to talk about your motivation. I'm not going to be name calling the way Trump has. And it's just another example for where, he
it speaks to the broader debate about how exactly to go after Trump. Do you get into the tit for tat mudslinging contest with this president who does call people names, and that's what he believes is effective to his strategy? Some Democrats believe that is not the right way to go after him. So it's interesting to see it play out on this level too. It's different when you call him a racist, though, because a majority of Americans do believe the president.
And Kamala Harris, who I believe has called the president a racist, here she is talking about the idea of whether or not he is a white supremacist.
Do you believe, as Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke have said, that he is a white supremacist?
I think you should ask him that question.
Are you willing to say that?
I think you should ask him that question. I'd be interested to see what his answer is. He is someone who empowers white supremacists and who condones their behavior.
So she's taking the Biden stance there.
Yeah, and that goes to Amy's point. He doesn't, and Harris doesn't. Biden and Harris, they don't want to be into this name calling thing. They don't want to, just get into this tit for tat with Trump. And it was interesting because Trump went after Biden today. Also said not playing with a full deck of cards, and be very happy if Biden got the nomination. But I do think style matters. Style matters in this campaign, and I do think there is a part of the Democratic base that wants to see their candidate get into the gutter and roll around. If Trump hits you below the belt, you hit him back. And I think the Biden and Harris, they're sitting back and saying, well, there's a long campaign. There's a lot of time to, if we're going to call them names, there's a lot of time to do that.
And we saw Hillary Clinton sort of go up to the ledge in August of 2016 with that alt-right speech, and probably, I think, go over the ledge when she made the speech about deplorables. I think the question for Democrats and Republicans is the whole idea of the white supremacists, is it the new deplorables, or could it be?
I think that's absolutely right, because the last thing that a Democrat wants to be doing is also saying Trump is a white supremacist.
And therefore his voters.
That's right. And I've talked to Trump supporters who go absolutely ballistic at that. Now these Democrats are saying we're all racist, we're all white supremacists.
And Trump weaponized the deplorables comment
Mm-hmm.
so effectively.
People wearing T-shirts.
People wearing T-shirts. They now you probably also get emails from people proudly declaring their deplorables, that this has become a sort of rallying cry. And so I think that's also something you have to look out for.
I guess the question is, can Biden and Harris kind of stick out this position where they're kind of neither here nor there, basically saying he emboldens a white supremacist, but that he isn't quite one. So we'll see where this goes. And as we go to break, a quick glimpse is President Trump's new pick for acting director of national intelligence. He'll be taking over for DNI chief Dan Coats. Sue Gordon, the #2 intel official behind Coats, resigned after being passed over for the top job. The president, he says he's in no rush to name a permanent replacement, and a number of people are in the running.
I want to get somebody that everybody can really come together with. So, I like Pete Hoekstra a lot. He's great. I will tell you, that's a job that everybody wants. DNI.
For a long, long time.
I want people to know that if they come into the United States illegally, they're getting out. They're going to be brought out. And this serves as a very good deterrent. When people see what they saw yesterday, and like they will see for a long time, they know that they're not staying here.
And call this Nancy Pelosi's line chart problem. As you can see here, more than half of House Democrats now support an impeachment inquiry. That number has grown steadily since about March and rose sharply after Special Counsel Robert Mueller's testimony to Congress. But listen to House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler, and he says the number actually doesn't matter because impeachment proceedings are already underway.
This is formal impeachment proceedings. We are investigating all the evidence, we're gathering the evidence, and we will, at the conclusion of this, hopefully by the end of the year, vote articles of impeachment to the House floor, or we won't. That's a decision that we'll have to make. But that's exactly the process we're in right now.
Nadler's committee plans to hold a set of hearings with key witnesses in the fall, a move that's being endorsed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Manu, I want to go to you on this. You had Nadler essentially say impeachment proceedings are already underway. Help us make sense of
Look, there's been this semantics thing going on for some time about whether they're actually in an impeachment inquiry, because they don't technically need to be in an impeachment inquiry to recommend articles of impeachment from the House Judiciary Committee to the full House. And that's essentially what Jerry Nadler is saying. What they're doing right now is undergoing a process, a legal fight, and have hearings and investigation to determine whether or not to ultimately recommend articles of impeachment. So that's why he's saying impeachment proceedings are underway. They have cited this in 2 court filings so far, saying that the House Judiciary Committee is actively considering articles of impeachment. One, to make the case to the courts that they need this information because, in their view, it's of the utmost constitutional importance, and 2, because they actually might go forward with this. And it's been interesting to see since the Mueller hearing, Pelosi's language has changed. Her tone has changed a bit. She has not been throwing cold water on this as much as possible, perhaps because of rising support within the ranks, but also because this is where it seems to be going. Ultimately, they may decide to go this route, and we'll see how it ends up.
Yeah, John, you want to add anything on this?
I mean, we'll have to see how August goes for these Democrats. And I think that we were talking about town halls before, and I think members are going to come back and they're going to tell Pelosi what they want. And Pelosi is going to do what she needs to do to defend her majority. And, you know, McConnell gets criticized for doing this on the Senate side, but Pelosi is doing the same thing here. She is defending her majority.
Yeah, and thinking about those Dems who won in those red districts.
The moderates are the one who got her back into the speaker's chair, winning those races. And if she thinks they need to, moving forward with impeachment will help them, she'll do it. If she doesn't, she won't. And that's, that hasn't changed for her.
All right, we'll see where this goes. And coming up, President Trump says Equinox owner Steve Ross will be hotter because of the controversy over hosting a Trump fundraiser. And right now, there's a high-dollar fundraiser going on in the Hamptons for President Trump, the host owner of Equinox in SoulCycle, and he's under fire for backing the president. But President Trump, on his way to the event, said the controversy is actually good for Stephen Ross. Take a listen.
And I understand the fundraiser was totally sold out, and it's very successful. The controversy makes Steve Ross hotter. He'll figure that out in about a week.
Joining me now, we've got CNN's Vicki Ward. And Vicki, you spoke with people who are close to Stephen Ross, and he has a very different point of view. What are you hearing about what he's thinking about this?
Right, Nia. I think that the people around Steve Ross, who I know pretty well, I've interviewed him many times, are very frustrated because the story that's been played out over the last 48 hours doesn't really reflect who Steve Ross really is. This is a man who has spent a great many years and a great many dollars, millions and millions of dollars, dedicated to his chief passion, which is race and racial inequality. And, he has known Donald Trump for a very long time. He does not agree with him. He's talked with me often about where he doesn't agree with the president. He was asked to give this fundraiser. He was given the guest list, and I think they didn't anticipate that it would blow up like this. I mean, the people around him have pointed out to me that his number 2, Jeff Blau, at Related, gave a fundraiser both for Hillary Clinton and for President Obama, and Steve Ross went to both of those. Last week he was in Washington on a bipartisan initiative for climate change. So I think that, yes, he's doing this. He knows the president. He's a big businessman. Typically people like him have to play both sides of the political aisle. But this is, I think, frustrating.
Vicki Ward, thanks for that reporting. And coming up, President Trump makes a big deal out of Joe Biden's latest verbal slip-up on the campaign trail. Critics are pouncing on Joe Biden after an apparent slip-up last night. The former vice president was speaking about education to voters in Iowa when he said this.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it. We think, no, we're going to dumb it down. They can do anything anybody else can do, given a shot.
Critics, including the Trump campaign, are seizing that slight pause there before Biden edits himself. And the Biden campaign working to clear this whole thing up today, and they released this statement. Quote, Donald Trump is desperate to change the subject from his atrocious record of using racism to divide this country. Vice President Biden misspoke and immediately corrected himself during a refrain he often uses to make the point that all children deserve a fair shot, and children born into lower income circumstances are just as smart as those born to wealthy parents. Despite the explanation, President Trump, he was still eager to pile on.
He made that comment. I said, whoa, I saw it because I was on something. I had a television. I saw his comment. Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. This is not somebody you can have as your president. But if he got the nomination, I'd be thrilled.
And Annie, Joe Biden known for his gaffes. Was this a gaffe? Was it a misstatement? He obviously corrected it right away, but this is kind of the Joe Biden you're going to get.
It's the Joe Biden you're going to get. He's going to just get more tired. He's going to have more appearances. And I mean, one of the issues here is that this is getting to race, and Joe Biden has a huge support with African Americans right now. But we've done interviews with a number of Black voters in early states, and that support is wide, but it's not that deep. And I think the more and more, have this kind of comments he made earlier, where he was talking about his working relationship with segregationists, that are going to start piling up. And I think that this is a very difficult issue for him, and it's absolutely a gaffe.
Yeah, Catherine, and you had the Trump reelection campaign seize on this. Andrew Clark, who's the rapid response director, he tweeted an edited video of Biden's comments, and with the line, "Yikes, have fun mitigating that one." So they see some sort of opportunity.
Yeah, they're going to jump on any examples like this to drive this narrative that he's gaffe prone, that he's not prepared. And of course, I mean, to Annie's point, the campaign is only accelerating. We're going to see him, I mean, he's doing multiple events in Iowa. He's going to be very busy in the coming weeks. And this comes at a moment when, I mean, he continues to be the leader in the polls, but other candidates are really moving up as we see polls in these early states, and that lead is not, it's not unchangeable.
Yeah.
So he's under pressure here.
Look, the president has the benefit of being graded to on a curve because he makes misstatements and false statements. He lies on a fairly regular basis. I mean, look, he's called Dayton Toledo this week, and while he was trying to comfort the nation after those massacres this weekend. So that is, so that how it plays out in a general election remains to be seen. But of course, Biden's rivals will make the point that he could say something at any given time that could change the narrative, and you need someone who's going to could prosecute an effective argument against the president, and that's the argument they'll make.
Biden did call, Ohio, Michigan.
That's right.
Houston, not exactly.
Which the Trump campaign also made sure to point out.
And the other point is if you've covered Biden for a long time, and I have, he always says stupid things. I mean, he's got a history, but because he likes to talk.
Yeah.
And he thinks as he's talking, and that's where you get in
we're
trouble.
For the next months here. He's got this very busy schedule in September, so we'll see where this goes. We'll see if some of this support ends up kind of crumbling. We've seen him steady in the polls so far, Annie.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this gaffe again. I say it goes to race, and that's what makes it particularly dangerous for him.
Yeah.
It's one thing for him to be Uncle Joe and sort of misspeak, but when he's talking about race, I mean, that is where a lot of his support comes from, is Black voters, and if they begin to question him, I think that lead that he's been able to hold.
And that's the big question: do they care? And we'll have to end it there. Thanks for joining us on Inside Politics. Pamela Brown is in for Brianna Keeler. She starts right